Hello.
Thanks for tuning into Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. My husband was away, and I found comfort where I least expected in the stable with Shadow. It started as a simple connection, but it quickly spiraled into something even I couldn't believe. My name is Laura, and I have a story to tell. One that might surprise some of you and make others question my choices. But this is my truth, a truth I've kept hidden for far too long, and now I feel ready to share it. Let me start by saying that this isn't a tale of wild behavior or some scandalous adventure. This is about love, loneliness, and how an innocent connection went down a path I never expected. I hope by sharing this, I can come to terms with what happened. My husband, James, and I have been married for just over 9 years. We met back when we were both fresh out of college. He was ambitious, quick-witted, and the type of guy who could light up any room with his charisma. I was captivated by him, and our early days together felt like something out of a romantic story. It was perfect in every sense. But as the years went by, life became less than ideal. We both moved to Nashville, Tennessee, to settle on a peaceful farm just outside the city limits, a dream we shared since college. However, James's career in corporate law took a toll on our lives. He was constantly on the move, traveling to different states for high-stakes cases, and while I understood how important his work was, it left me alone much more often than I had expected. We drifted apart. Days would go by without meaningful conversations, and when we did speak, it was the usual, "How was your day?" and "What's for dinner?" But beneath the surface, I felt an emptiness growing inside me. I was craving connection, companionship, someone to share life with while James was away. One evening, as James prepared for yet another business trip, I remember standing in our kitchen, asking him to stay. But he just smiled, kissed me on the forehead, and promised he'd be back soon. That was his way of making it all seem fine, but I knew something was missing. We chose this quiet farm life to have a place of our own, somewhere peaceful, away from the city buzz. We even decided to keep some animals, which was a big part of our dream. We had a few chickens, a couple of goats, and a striking black horse named Shadow. Shadow was a gift from James on our 6th wedding anniversary, a symbol of our shared dreams. He was a majestic creature, strong and intelligent, with a gentle temperament that felt almost human. I'd always loved horses, but there was something uniquely calming about Shadow. During the lonely days when James was away, Shadow became my comfort. I spent hours in the stable with him, brushing his coat, talking to him, and just being in his company. Animals have this way of sensing when you're down, and Shadow would always nudge me gently, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone. It may sound strange, but those moments with Shadow started to fill a void. I found myself telling him things I could hardly admit to myself, let alone to James. Shadow was always there, patient and calm, offering a silent understanding I couldn't get anywhere else. One evening, after James left for yet another trip, I found myself venting to Shadow about how I felt abandoned. I hadn't even realized how much I'd been holding back. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt, and somewhere in the middle of it, I caught myself thinking of Shadow as more than just a horse. I quickly laughed it off, brushing it aside. "Laura, you're being ridiculous," I thought. But something had changed. I couldn't deny that. As the weeks went on, my time with Shadow became a daily ritual. I'd go out to the stable each evening, sharing my thoughts, frustrations, and dreams with him. One day, while I was brushing Shadow's coat, a storm began to brew. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the sky darkened quickly. I was about to head back inside when Shadow became agitated, pacing and snorting in the stable. Concerned, I stayed with him, trying to calm him down as the storm rolled in. Just then, a loud clap of thunder echoed, and the power went out across the farm. The entire stable was plunged into darkness, with only flashes of lightning illuminating Shadow's eyes. My heart raced, not from fear of the storm, but from the intense feeling of connection in that moment. I stood there with him in the dark, whispering comforting words as he finally began to relax. It was a surreal experience, one that felt almost too intimate. From that night on, my bond with Shadow grew deeper. I found myself lingering in the stable longer, feeling a sense of peace and security I hadn't felt in ages. Shadow became more than just a source of comfort. He was a presence I depended on, especially in the long, silent stretches of my days. I knew it was wrong to rely on him so heavily, but I couldn't help it. I hadn't felt this understood in years. Shadow was there when James wasn't, and that reality made me question everything about my marriage. The turning point came on a particularly hot summer night. James had been gone for nearly 2 weeks, and communication between us had dwindled to brief, impersonal texts. That evening, I walked out to the stable, hoping that spending time with Shadow would help ease the loneliness I felt. As I stroked his mane and whispered my thoughts, I felt an intense rush of emotions I couldn't quite explain. Lost in the moment, I didn't hear the car pull up. James had come home earlier than expected and caught sight of me standing close to Shadow, whispering softly to him. "Laura?" His voice startled me, and I turned to see him standing in the stable doorway, looking confused and suspicious. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone edged with something I hadn't heard from him in a long time. His eyes darted between me and Shadow, as if he was trying to understand what he was witnessing. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, unsure of how to respond. It's not what it looks like, James," I stammered, feeling my face flush. But even as I said it, I realized I wasn't sure what it did look like. How could I explain this strange bond without sounding out of my mind? James stepped further into the stable, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "Laura, you're here talking to a horse in the middle of the night. What am I supposed to think?" His voice was calm, but had a sharp edge that cut through the tension in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "James, I know it sounds strange, but with you gone so much, I've been lonely." My voice was barely above a whisper. "Shadow has been here for me, when I felt like I had no one to talk to." James's expression softened for a moment, but he quickly shook his head, as if refusing to understand. "He's a horse, Laura. You're acting like he's more than that." "I know it sounds absurd," I admitted, my face hot with embarrassment. "But he was there when you weren't." I started talking to him because I needed someone to listen, and over time, it just became something I depended on. James looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "So, what are you saying, Laura? That you'd rather confide in a horse than in your own husband?" "It's not that simple," I replied, fighting back tears. "I tried to tell you how I was feeling, but every time I brought it up, you seemed so distracted or too tired. Eventually, I stopped trying." He sighed, rubbing his temples in frustration. "I had no idea things were this bad. I thought we were fine." "We weren't," I replied softly. "And maybe I should have pushed harder to talk to you, but I didn't want to feel like a burden." Shadow was just there in a way that felt safe. There was a long, heavy silence between us. I could see the hurt in James's eyes, but there was something else too, disappointment, maybe even a trace of betrayal. "So, what are you telling me?" he finally asked, his voice breaking slightly. "That you're more connected to him than to me?" "No, James, that's not it," I replied quickly, stepping forward, reaching for his hand. "I love you. I made a mistake. I let my emotions get the best of me, and I turned to Shadow when I should have turned to you." He pulled his hand back, pacing in the small stable, visibly struggling to process everything. "Laura, do you know how this sounds? I come home to find my wife confessing to some emotional affair with our horse." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "James, please," I pleaded. "It wasn't like that. I didn't do anything inappropriate. I just got lost in the loneliness, and Shadow was there." My voice trembled, barely holding back tears. He stood with his back to me, seemingly gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke, his voice strained but softer. "Laura, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten?" I swallowed, feeling the weight of my own guilt. "I tried, James. But every time I brought it up, you'd brush it off or tell me we'd talk later." After a while, I started to believe this was just how things were going to be. So I found comfort where I could. I know that sounds ridiculous, but Shadow was there for me in a way you weren't. He turned to face me, his face softened, the anger fading into something more vulnerable. I didn't know. I thought we were okay. We weren't, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want to keep burdening you. You were always so busy, and I didn't want to seem needy. But the truth is, I needed you, James. I needed my husband, and when you weren't there, I turned to Shadow. James looked at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of pain and understanding. I guess I didn't realize how much I was missing from our life together, he said finally, his voice soft. I was so focused on work, thinking that it was for us, but I never asked if this was what you needed too. I took a step closer, reaching out to him again, this time feeling him take my hand. James, I know it sounds insane, and I'm so sorry it got to this point, but I want to fix this. I want us to find our way back to each other. I don't want to lose you. He sighed, squeezing my hand gently. I love you, Laura, and I don't want to lose you either. But we need to work on this. Really work on it. Not just gloss over things and hope they get better. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope as he pulled me into a hug. I'm ready to try, I whispered. I want to rebuild what we've lost, to make things better. As we stood there in the stable, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that this was our first step forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and it would take time, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.
Bye-bye.